how's your English?
Is it German?
Excellent response. It's awful. I don't know anything in German. But I'm asking because I don't speak any German. I hope this comes out okay. We do have a copy of the story mapping book here. There is a German edition. German was one of the first languages it was translated into. Oddly, I don't know, the book is selling pretty well, but and I can watch the sales on Amazon.com, but this book sells more on Amazon.de, Amazon's Amazon in Germany than it does in Amazon in the U.S. So there are more Germans that have this book than Americans. And it's actually selling pretty well in America too. So I don't know where they all are. There's a lot of them somewhere. My name is Jeff Patton. Thank you for coming on such a short notice to this. It's kind of my fault for being wishy-washy about, I think Mitch brought up, do you want to do a talk? I said, I've got 2 classes. I don't know if I want to do a talk at night. And I didn't answer him. And so we didn't answer until I got here. Thanks for coming with maybe 24 hours notice. For those that don't know me, my name is Jeff Patton. I've been around in the Agile community for a long time. I've been in software development for a little over 20 years, getting close to 25 now, I think. I started with Agile development very early on and very accidentally. I worked at a product company for a little over 10 years, and I was getting frustrated with the way we worked, and I wanted to look for something different, and I left my company, and one of the executives of my company also left, and he started at this cool startup in San Francisco, California, and this startup was using this cool new process called extreme programming. They'd hired this guy named Kent Beck, who had written this book called Extreme Programming Explained, and he was coming to the company, and this was going to be the secret weapon for this startup. They were going to use this process, this XP process. And I was hired there as a product manager, and I was first told that we're going to use these things called user stories to document our. We're going to use user stories to describe what we're building. First off, I thought that was a pretty stupid name. How many people here are using stories in your work right now? It's pretty much almost everybody, if not everybody. When I first heard the term stories, I thought that's a pretty stupid name. We're building important things here. This is critical. We're trying to get a company up and running. To call what we're doing stories or fairy tales or fabrications or anything else seems stupid. Why would we use that term? It has taken me over a decade to really figure out what stories mean, and if you're new to them or getting this, hopefully I can shave at least 5 years off of your learning time. We're going to, before I can talk about story mapping, look, that's a story map. It's a dead simple idea. If I'm trying to tell a story, a big story, if I were to tell a story about what you do, I would tell that story step by step. First you do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and we kind of build a row. Build a row of these short verb phrases that tell a story. And then if that story is about something that people would do in our software, we kind of break it down or figure out what the details are under each step. That helps us figure out what to build. That's it. I'm done. Because the story mapping isn't any more complicated than that. But one of the things that goes horribly wrong is the whole stories thing. Now I'm going to switch back and forth between doing things and drawing things. There's all that stuff all over the wall back there because I just taught a 2-day class, and when I'm teaching 2 days, I don't use a lot of slides. I skip a lot of slides, so I'll do a lot of hand drawing. First thing I want to make clear to everybody is, well, I've been using stories since the year 2000. The term Agile was coined in 2001, and Agile was coined as a wrapper term that included Scrum and extreme programming and a bunch of other things. These days, a lot of people who learn Scrum also learn user stories, and they don't know they came from extreme programming, that originally Scrum didn't use those story things. But stories have gone completely sideways or completely wrong since almost the very beginning. People have forgotten what they're really for. So look, I want to tell you that stories, stories are meant to solve two problems in software development. And what's interesting is neither are about writing better requirements. The first problem, I'll give you the two problems here. Look, the first problem is that documents, the way we write any kinds of requirements, that's why stories aren't a better way to write requirements, documents just don't work. At least not the way you think they do. The other problem stories are meant to solve is, look, there is always too much to build. Let's start with the documents don't work part of it. Hey, who here has read the story mapping book before? This is you've heard all this before. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Yeah, it's the same stuff. Anyway, I'll see if there's anything else good in there. But, it's just a live version. That's it. Look, imagine. Say it again.
Then they make a musical version.
Yes, actually, I should work on that, except I sing so poorly. I play kazoo really well. Yeah. All right, so imagine someone at your office is leaving and they're holding a going away party, and it's your job to call and order the cake. You call a bakery, the bakery says, great, we can make the cake you want. What would you like us to write on the cake? And you say, well, can you write on it, so long Alicia, in purple, and put stars around it? They write it down, you pick up the cake, and this is what you get. This is exactly meets your requirements. It's exactly what you said you wanted. This is a cake from a website called Cake Rex. Yes, that's really a website. It gets millions of visitors a month. I thought it was a silly little thing, but it's got a lot of traffic. This is the cover of the author's first book. What's funny are she gets a lot of weird, how would you get so many weird cake pictures? But you can. And her writing is really good, and there's a lot of different types of weird cakes. Some that are not cakes you want to show to your children, and the other things. So you should spend time there. But one of the underlying themes is these themes of misinterpreted or literally interpreted instructions. So you can see what's wrong with that cake. So look, you have to hear English and be able to read English to make these make sense. You see what went wrong there? Makes sense? Okay, there are a lot of examples of literally interpreted or misinterpreted instructions. This means we don't have sprinkles. There are examples in software. This is called a non-functional requirement. You can spend many hours. I'm not going to show you many more. And these are all pretty silly. You would think, I've got to look, these are stupid. Anyone who actually read that and wrote that on a cake was just not doing their job well, or just being mean to the people who wrote the instructions. But if you've been in software development very long, you probably got situations where you wrote something down, you told somebody, they said, I get it, you hand it to them, and then you've been really surprised at what came back. You can see when it comes back that they absolutely did not get it. Those are $10 and $20 mistakes in the US, 10 or 20 euro mistakes. This is there are a lot of real mistakes. This is a $125 million mistake. This is way back in 1999. NASA launched something called the Mars Climate Orbiter. The stupidest thing about it was its name, because the only thing it could not do is orbit. it flew directly to Mars and then crashed directly into Mars. And there were two software teams writing guidance software for it, and they were exchanging documents, explaining how their interfaces work. It's just that one team was using English units and one team was using metric units. They could both point to each other saying, hey, you read our documents, right? And the conversions were supposed to be happening and weren't happening. It took them a long time to figure out what the problem was, and people can argue it should have been tested or it should have been checked some way, but they were small calculation errors. Just between the distance between Earth and Mars, small calculation errors add up. The problem, the underlying problem is, well, it's this documents don't work problem. The idea that we may all read the same document, we may all sign off on it, we may all nod and say, yep, I get it, no problem, I understand, but we're all imagining very different things. So look, waiting for the picture to be taken, but that is Kent Beck. A little shot of Kent Beck. He's got this disruptively simple idea to fix all problems that ever existed with documents, and that's to just stop it. Just to stop exchanging documents and tell me your story. Now, his clever idea goes like this. This is super sophisticated. If you've got something that you want, write it down on a card. And because it's a card, it's really small and you can't write down very much. And what's interesting is it does not matter what you write or how much you write or if it's in any particular format, you just write it down because you're going to get together with somebody who knows how to build stuff, and together you are going to talk. You're going to tell your story, and together in that conversation you'll figure out what needs to be built. Stories get their name from how they're meant to be used, not how we write them. Now, that's it. That's all there is to stories. So I've already told you, look, we've only been into this for a few minutes, and I've already explained stories and story mapping to you. We can all go now. But the problem is, in agile development, and people still manage to screw that super simple idea up. How many of you are in environments where you're using Scrum to do things? How many are using something, keep your hand up if you're using backlog grooming or backlog refinement sessions. Okay, so look, this is, these days, because Scrum didn't originally have stories, and the stories came in the Scrum late. People used to use, they were called backlog items, and in theory, there's a lot of things, and we can talk after the fact about how Scrum and XP and things have kind of changed and merged over time. But the story practice didn't exist originally. In Scrum. But so we've kind of repurposed a meeting in Scrum called a backlog grooming meeting. And look, this is how they normally go. This is how I see them. We tell the team to show up. They've all got to be there. They're not happy. They complain the meeting lasts too long. We project Jira on the wall. And maybe 2 or 3 people are actually interested in what's going on. Everyone else is kind of pretending to be interested. People believe that if they use their smartphones under the table, we will not notice. They'll say, I'm doing super important stuff on Facebook and stuff like that. And I have a lot of pictures of people in backlog grooming sessions, and I'm surprised that there are often people yawning and actually people completely asleep. When we talk about working together and having good conversations, that's not at all what Kent was talking about. When we have these conversations, there's something special going on. Yes, we talked about, well, look, it's not just talking, actually. In fact, if we just talk, or even worse, if one person talks and everyone else just listens, it may be true right now. I'm saying words to you, but I have no idea what you're really understanding. And you may nod and say you get it. But it's not until you feed back, not until you explain to me what you understand, and even better than explaining, not until you visualize it. If it's something complex, if you draw pictures or show something to explain what you understand, then we start to really get it. You didn't understand what I understand, and if we've got a conversation between people who understand how to build stuff and people who understand users in the business and people who understand, well, if we've got a diverse group of people, it's no surprise that they understand things differently. They see the world differently. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's that together, if we combine and refine and put things together, we end up with really a more complete picture. When we leave this conversation, we may still talk about the same story or reference the same feature name or talk about the same customer, but now when we say it, we actually mean the same thing. What we're going for is this kind of intangible state of shared understanding. You can't see it, you can't write it down, you can't sign off on it. We have to feel it. We keep, in traditional software processes, we rely on sharing documents. And we believe, well, we treat documents like contracts. And if you sign the contract, then you must have understood. I know that I have credit cards and a home loan, and I have lots of paperwork I've signed that I know I don't understand. But the document part, that's not what helps us understand. If we're having effective story conversations, they don't look like that projecting Jira on the wall thing. They look a lot more like people standing and talking and pointing and gesturing. Look, these are story conversations. I'm going to spill these out. And there's a couple important parts there. On the left-hand side, people are talking about, what the software might look like and how it might behave. And they're building shared understanding. On the right side are examples of people writing bullet points. They're writing acceptance criteria. And it's after they understand how it works, then they can write down short lists of how would we check this to confirm it actually does work that way. It's the conversations on the left that yielded those are acceptance criteria stuff on the right. Now, I'm going to jump one slide here. This is a guy at a company called Atlassian. People know who Atlassian is? How many people use Jira here? Okay, that's a lot. They are kind of the best-selling product for doing this. When I walk around most Agile environments, Agile people are big about using sticky notes and junk on walls. When I walk around Atlassian, they have lots of sticky notes and junk on walls. But at most Agile companies, what I see on the walls are things like task boards or burn-down charts or things like that. But so at other Agile companies, I'd see that. But at Atlassian, I don't see any of that. Because they have Jira, they use Jira for that, and they use task walls on Jira, and they put backlogs in Jira. They don't need those on the wall. What they have on the wall are the residue, all the stuff that builds up as they talk about stories. What you'll see are, well, on the left, those yellow things are quick and dirty sketches of screens, and they're barely understandable, and lots of bullet points and notes written down as we talked about it. On the right side of that same wall is something that's a little bit more of a mature flow. There are wireframes that have been printed out, and again, like lines drawn all around them, and you can see that they've been talking about it and explaining how things work. If I walk around from team to team, I'll see equivalent boards and walls with junk all over them. The picture right there in the middle, they've been having a conversation about the story. These things on sticky notes, actually those are Jira tickets, because they've looked at that screen, they talked about what's in there, and they said, okay, we should break this down into several different stories, and they write those on there, and they'll photograph that, and somebody will take that and key it into Jira later. They don't do it projecting Jira on the wall. This is a team at Atlassian at a stand-up meeting. Instead of going around a circle saying, I worked on this ticket number yesterday and I'm going to work on this ticket number again today, they're standing in front of a flow of the feature they're working on, and they point at it and say, I worked on this today. It's interesting at other company stand-ups that are using Jira, I hear Jira ticket numbers a lot. And when I watch stand-up meetings at Atlassian, I don't hear them reference Jira ticket numbers very much at all. Now, they're not always standing in front of workflows like this, but they do usually reference the feature or the screen or the thing they're working on. All these simple, crappy visualizations that we build are critical. They're important things. They work like vacation photos. Now, if I can explain to you what I mean here, look, those are my two daughters, and we're on vacation in Hawaii. Has anybody here been to Hawaii before? Who's been to Hawaii? Yeah, not very many people. Where do you go? There's other truck. Look, yeah, in America, I guess you got to cross over. Yeah, it's not the closest place to get tropical for you guys. Okay, so look, when I think of Hawaii, I think of a lush tropical paradise with lots of palm trees and beautiful beaches, things like that. But in fact, there are lots of parts of Hawaii. In fact, the biggest island in Hawaii, the whole west side of the island, is a freaking desert. It's awful. If you look at those trees, there's kind of scrubby, low things. There are no swaying palm trees there. And in fact, that big island is super volcanic. Active volcanoes on the south side of it, and every beach is either covered with lava rock, or if there's any sand at all, it's covered with people. And the beaches were sucking, and on this vacation, my kids just wanted to hang around the hotel pool. I decided we'd spent way too much money to hang around the hotel pool, so I said we're going to find a beach to go to. I found a beach on TripAdvisor. They said it's really awesome, but it's a little hard to get to. What hard to get to meant was over an hour's drive on a four-wheel drive trail. That was a bad idea in a rental Ford Mustang. We spent a lot of scraping on rocks and things like that. By the time we get there, we're all a little shaken up because we know we got to do the drive back. We park in the parking lot. There's not very many cars there. That's a good sign. We get out of the car. There's no beach. We can't even hear the water. There's a path going across more lava rock. If you have kids, you know how this is going. My kids are begging to please just go back to the hotel pool. And as any good father would, I told them, no, we are going to the beach. We marched across for another half hour across lava rock. And this is the opening to the beach. That's why there's so many footsteps there, because everybody has to go in and out there, but you won't see any more people there. There are multiple beaches chained together. There are hardly any people. I think the whole day we saw like 10 other people. There were lots of fish in the water. There were turtles up on the shore. We had a great day, and this is us just leaving at the end of the day. Now, I'm not telling you all that to sell you Hawaii. I'm just telling you all that because you wouldn't have known any of that because you weren't there. If I'd showed you the picture, you could have told me, oh, that looks nice and that looks like fun. But look, if you were to look at that picture and read those notes, you could kind of make some sense of it. You're in the software world, you know what's going on there, but I promise you that whatever information you think is there, you don't know a fraction of it because you weren't there. But for the people that were there, this helps them remember. That's the purpose of documents. You'll see this vacation photo effect even when you write a document you think is really good. You'll write it really well. You may work with somebody else. You'll have them read it. You both agree this document is fabulous. You send it to someone else, and it's a cake wreck. Because they weren't there. They can't read between the lines the way that you can. There are things that they miss. So look, these effective story conversations are meant to build shared understanding. And the best documents use our words to recall. Well, they help us recall those conversations. They don't replace those conversations. So, look, the purpose of these documents, or the purpose of stories, is to you don't replace the documents, they build on top of documents. Documents don't work well, so, well, we use storytelling to build shared understanding. Now, the next thing, the too much to build thing. Hey, I'm taking a long wandering path to get to talking about story mapping. Are you guys okay with this? These are the long ones. Look, I'm going to draw a model that I draw over and over until it's so dead obvious that everybody says, not that again. But I'm going to start by telling you what I tell everybody. We get bound up in software development, worried about building software. But it is, in fact, software is not the point. When we're building software, your job is not to build software, your job is to change the world. This sounds big and scary. However, I'm not talking about world peace or the refugee crisis in Eastern Europe. I'm talking, and it's actually the refugees are hitting this country and every other European country. We're talking about the corner of the world that you can affect. The corner of the world where, look, if your company makes a product, the corner of the world where your product is, and I'm talking about the people that may use your product, those are the people whose lives you really are affecting. Now, the way this model works is we start by looking at the world as it is now. If we look at the people who buy or use your product, we might find people that are unhappy. Now, you may not have, if you're a startup, you may not have a product in the market, so we look at people we want to be using our product. We'll find people that are unhappy and people that are worse than unhappy, that may be angry, and people that may be confused. It's when we look at these people and look at our product, we come up with ideas. Now, in the startup world, these could be ideas for whole new products, but in the existing software world, we think of new features that we can add to make things better. We think of enhancements to make the features we already have better, or we can call them new capabilities. But look, whatever we call them, we eventually slip into software language and start calling them our requirements. It's important to remember that that word requirement is just a flashy way to say we have great ideas that will help people. That's it. Now, it does not matter what process you use. If you use Agile or Waterfall or some other process, you will build something, hopefully, and something will come out. And that, we have to go forward in time, so that lands in the world later. And what we hope is true is that those people that were unhappy before are happy now. Now, people are different, and some people will be less happy than other people, and there's always some people you just can't please. The words I want to add to this, it's everything between the idea and the delivery. Term for that is output. Right? 3 important terms in this model. That's the first. You know you're talking about output when you talk about products or features or enhancements or capabilities. Look, our backlog is filled with a lot of these things. We know we're worried about output and measuring it when we talk about time and cost or our budget. When we're worried about our schedule, we're measuring output, and in Agile we'll talk about output by saying velocity, which is how much stuff we get over time. But that is not why we built it. If I were to ask you to think about a product that you love, that you would recommend to someone else, and, think about a product you love. Think about something you'd recommend to something else. I can almost promise you won't say, I really love this product because it was delivered on time, or I really love this product because it was cheap, or anything like that. When we love a product, or when something is working for us, well, look, I want to refer to this stuff that happens after things come out as outcome. That's why it's named that. And how we measure outcome, or how we observe it, is not by stuff delivered over time, but it's we measure behavior change. If you love a product, it might be because you were doing something before that kind of sucked, or you weren't doing it because it was too hard to do, but now you've got this product and you do things differently than you used to. Your experience with it is good doing it. Now, if you release a product to the market and nobody uses it, that's output, but that's a bad outcome. If you release a product to market and people use it and they hate it, that's a bad outcome. If you release a product to market and people use it and like it, that's a good outcome. That's why we did this. Now, further here, once people use it, we can also start to ask them or measure even more subjectively their satisfaction. Do they like it? But if they don't use it, their satisfaction may be kind of low. And that's how we start to measure this stuff. Now, when I draw the model this way, it looks like it is all about making people happy, but it's not. You're not a nonprofit. you gotta get a paycheck, you work for a company that may be getting a paycheck, your company has a vision for where it wants to head, it has some strategy for how to get there. It may be using some metrics to measure its success, and those metrics may be going up, but then they might have gone down recently, or they've gone flat, and people inside the company are unhappy. Now, the first decision they should make is, gosh, which of our customers should be paying closer attention to? The heart of business strategy is recognizing not what to build, but who to pay attention to. Now, if we pay attention to somebody, we understand what their problems are, we add features, we deliver things, and they love it and they use it. If one person uses our product, that's interesting. If hundreds do, that's better. If thousands or tens of thousands to do, that's really good. Then we start to see it in our business, and whatever those metrics were, they start to get better. That makes people happy inside the business, and that's what generates this other term I want to use here, and that is impact. We don't measure impact in behavior change. Well, we use words like return on investment, or things like brand awareness, or market share, how much market we have versus our competitors. Those are the things that end up being really valuable to the organization. But we don't get those things unless we get these things. If people don't buy and use and do those things with our product, we don't get those. Now, the real problem, or the one I just said earlier, is the problem are these stupid ideas. The problem is that everybody has them. These customers have ideas, and they will tell us, and these stakeholders have ideas, and they will tell us. And when we ship successful products and we get more customers, all that means is they're going to tell us more crap that we should be putting into our product, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And this causes this big kind of backup sort of thing where we're trying to build more and more, and we try to figure out how to build more and more stuff faster. But I promise you, if you double the speed that you can build things at, the ideas will come in 4 times as fast. There's no way to get ahead, just give up right now. That's not the point. Your goal isn't to build more crap faster. In fact, especially if you're in the product side of things, your goal is to figure out how to build less. When you build less, well, what I'm saying is that you need to minimize that output stuff at the same time that you maximize that outcome and impact. Well, look, the way we go about doing that, if I rewind, in 1990, I was working for a company that built software for brick and mortar retailers. In fact, I was there for 10 years, so I was there for a long time. When we were young as a company, I was employee number 38. We grew up to close to 300. And in the early days, I talked directly to my customers and users. I knew that when I say they have ideas, I know from talking with a lot of them, I knew my executives had ideas. I had a team. My team had limited size. I couldn't build everything. I knew that we were just making good choices. So sometimes we'd use all those words. Sometimes we'd use requirements, but we didn't think it actually meant they were required. We knew we were just making good decisions. Now, as our company grew and grew, we added more people, and I was responsible for part of our product. And a lady came to me one day saying, "Jeff, we need you to add these enhancements to the part of the product you're responsible for." I said, "Great. Tell me a little bit about, well, which of our customers are looking for these things?" And she said, "Well, they're requirements for the next release." And I said, "Yeah, I get it. And tell me which of our customers need them, and look, who are the users, and what kind of problems do these things solve?" And she looked at me like I was stupid and said, "They're requirements." That's when I learned that this word actually means shut up. Now, the person I was talking to actually was mad at me for a lot of other reasons, and a lot of it's because I was arguing with her about a lot of things. So I can't completely blame her. But the problem is I was asking her and I was catching her because she did not know. Because she had assumed they were just requirements. And she had assumed, like a lot of people, that just because it's called a requirement, that it actually matches the definition in the dictionary. And in fact, they don't. You probably know, and you may have learned that if you deliver all the requirements, everything that people want, you may still find people are ticked off. You may also have had situations where you deliver just a fraction of what people ask for, and people are thrilled. So these have nothing to do with what happens out there, or very little to. You got to deliver something, or nothing happens. Now, it is not just me that has this post-traumatic stress disorder over that word. This is Kent again. He described stories in this book, Extreme Programming Explained. There's a first and a second edition. Has anybody been in this long enough to have read the first edition of XP Explained? Wow, okay, you guys are the serious old timers. So you know that there's, have you read both? It's kind of like an Old and New Testament, because in the New Testament, the second edition, he's a kinder, gentler methodologist, and there's kind of hellfire and brimstone in the first edition. But in the second edition and both editions, he introduces this concept of stories pretty much the same way. By the way, you'll notice that he does not call them user stories. Now, this edition came out in 2003, the same year as Mike Cohn's User Stories Applied, the same year as Kent Beck wrote the foreword in Mike Cohn's book. But Kent continues to insist on calling them stories because he's referring to the way that they're used, not the way that they're written. And look, we can use that story concept if we're talking about APIs and headless stuff in the back of the system, because it's referring to the way we work, not the fact that it has to be about users and user interface. Now look, Kent said that software development has been steered wrong by the word requirement. Defined in the dictionary as something mandatory or obligatory, the word carries a connotation of absolutism and permanence, inhibitors to embracing change. The word requirement is just plain wrong. Now you can see that's what I highlighted in the book. Look, what I asked Kent, where did this whole concept come from? You know, even in your books, Kent, you start talking about story cards pretty early on, and you get people kind of fixated on writing stories. And again, a back and forth email conversation I had with him a long time ago now. He said, look, what I was thinking of is the way users sometimes tell stories about the cool new things their product does. Like I type in a zip code and it automatically fills in the city and state without me having to touch a button. I think that was the example that triggered the idea. If you can tell stories about what the software does and generate energy and interest and vision in your listener's mind, then why not tell the story before the software does it? It's a simple idea. We talk about who's doing it and what they're doing, and we generate that energy, interest, and vision in listeners' mind, and it's that shared understanding that we are fishing for. When we have these discussions, we need to focus those discussions and collaboration around who will use the product and what they'll do after delivery. Well, this is the who, what, and why. Basically, you need to think things through. I've got another cake wreck picture to show. You have to brace yourselves. This is a cake for a baby shower. So that is a cake, honestly. Do they have? I know that they have. People have told me they have baby showers in Germany. Some countries don't, but yeah. This is the party if you're a woman who's pregnant and you hold the party. It's a celebration. You get lots of presents for, usually for your baby. And look, if you look at that as a cake, it is a work of art. I cannot create a cake that isn't the shape of the pan it came out of, or I can't frost it in any color other than what's in the pan. This is perfectly sculpted. It really looks like a lifelike baby, but look, you have to, when we talk about the who, what, and why, and look, what I will focus people on is not what it looks like, but what will people do? Look, if you think of a cake, what do people do with cakes?
Cut it in pieces.
Yeah, it's when you take that thing to a baby shower that it is a real groove killer. If you just focus on how it looks, it is awesome. But if you focus on how it's used and what people will do with it, and what effect you want to have people have, if your goal is a happy baby shower. This is kind of a groove killer. Look, if we talk about all this stuff, let me get this last point here. There is always too much to build. We've got to be constantly focusing our conversations on building things that matter. We need to minimize output. We need to understand this who, this what, and this why. That's why we're doing this. I don't care how you write stories, what template you use, but if you're not talking with each other, they're not stories. They're just crappy documentation. If you don't talk about what you can take out and how you can make the value as high as possible, then they're not stories. They're just, just communicating requirements. I want to trim just a little bit here. I want to make sure that I'm getting to stuff that really matters. Stories solve these two problems when used right, but stories create another problem. This one I'll show. We focus a lot on stories, and we focus a lot on development. And if we're focused on development, well, one of the things we'll look at a lot is that stupid velocity thing. And velocity is how much stuff we build. And if we're using a process like Scrum, we've got these short sprints, and we grab things out of a product backlog, and we want to put them through, and we expect several of these stories to go through in a sprint. And for several of them to go through in a sprint, they need to be small enough that we can finish a few, and usually people will say, look, a good story has got to be, you got to be able to build this in maybe 1 to 3 days, at least for the development time of it. And look, to know if it was small, we needed to be able to estimate it, and we really need to get things done, really done, which means we need to be able to test it, and we need to be able to demonstrate it. There's a lot of things a good story needs to be, and in fact a lot of people will say it's not a good story if it doesn't have all those things, and in fact if we're going to really get it done, it probably needs to have that acceptance criteria. So we can agree on whether it is or isn't done. I want to find this picture. I want to ask, look, when you come up with great ideas that will help people solve a problem, and when you deliver them to them, things will be better, do they fit that criteria? You're supposed to say no. The problem is, we come up with great ideas, and they are big, blobby things. They're big, they may be for whole features or whole capabilities, or maybe even for whole products. And I need to tell you that, these ideas are still stories. This does not mean they're good stories. These are still fabulous stories, because the way we use stories, stories are meant to be used this way. They're a way to work, not a way to document. And we can still pick up this story, and we can talk about what it is and who it's for and why we're building it. In fact, when we pull one of these stories out to first talk about and have these best first conversations, the conversation isn't about how big is it, what's the acceptance criteria, and how do we test it. The conversation is, well, should we build this? Do we make a go decision, or do we make a no-go decision and say, this is a stupid story, we should throw it away? When we make the no-go decision from here, it goes into this super special backlog. This is called the output minimizer. This is one of your most valuable backlogs, especially when your goal is to minimize output. And if we make a go decision, we say, okay, great, we've got to break this thing down into a lot of little pieces because we need to better understand it. We need to tell a lot more stories. But our first best conversation is about that. Now, I'm going to tell you this story. This is in the story mapping book too. This lady's name is Rachel Davies. In the late 1990s, she worked at this company in the UK called Connextra. Connextra is one of the early adopters of all this story stuff and this XP stuff. And, they had this kind of open backlog policy where if you thought of a great idea, you could put it into the backlog. And they were trying to stay true to this stuff, so they kept them on cards, and people would write a few words on a card. And, well, because it was open, everybody did exactly that. And the backlog, you remember that too many ideas thing? It would just pile up and pile up. And it was Rachel's job to kind of start to go through these and figure out what they were about and who they were for. And she would pick it up, and there'd be a few words on there. She had to figure out who wrote it, she'd have to try and recognize the handwriting. If she couldn't recognize it, she'd have to ask around. And then the few words on there would usually be for a feature or something like that. And then Rachel would find the person who wrote it, and she would say, well, tell me a little bit about this. Who is it for? And how would they use it, and what benefit do they get? And she would have this short conversation with people, and people would say, they'd try and think it through, and they'd say, oh, you know what, now that I think about it, they can already do that in this other place in the product, never mind. Or, oh, now that I think about it, a better solution would be this other thing. Or, now that I think about it, never mind, I don't think that's a good idea anymore. And Rachel got tired of this, and she said, look, I just would like people to think it through just a little bit more before they dropped it in the backlog. So they and people at Connextra came up with this clever template. And this card she's holding in front of her is the template. They put this as a card to pass around at a conference in 2001. This is the last known one of these cards in existence. So it's a historical artifact. This is where they announced their clever idea to make story writing go better. First, I need to point out it has a title. When I see people using these story templates, sometimes they forget the title. It's like having the abstract of a book but no title. And it's this format that we all know and love. If you know stories, it says, as a type of user, I want something so that I get some sort of benefit. And this was a super important conversation starter because actually the person who wrote it would have to think it through enough to be able to write that. And then when Rachel showed up, she could read it and think it through, and then they could sit down, and the conversation started from there. It didn't finish the conversation. In fact, there was all that talking to do. Look, if Rachel was going to move this thing from a big idea to lots of little ideas, they were going to have to break it down and figure it out. If you've tried to use that format when stories are little tiny like this, you might have felt it feeling really bumpy and not quite right. What's interesting is it really wasn't ever intended for those little things, although we use it for those little things a lot. We keep trying to force fit it down there. Rachel used that originally to drive her first best conversations. Now, look, for these first conversations, yeah, that story template works pretty well. In my story mapping book, there's something that I like that's a little bit more fuller featured called an opportunity canvas. It goes deeper into who, what, and why, and how we measure success. If it's successful, helps us make a little bit better no-go template. Don't expect people to write that before they put it in. We work on it together to have that conversation. But this middle area here, well, I'm going to talk about this stuff as, well, this is discovery work. In discovery work, it isn't about building software fast. Well, discovery is about, it's about learning fast. This isn't going to be a talk about discovery, although we could go into a lot of detail about that. But look, discovery is where we build a deeper understanding of this product. If I've got a big idea, I can pull that big idea. If it passes that go test, I pull it in and move it forward from here. So let's fast forward and talk about, when I talk about story mapping, this is the picture I show most often. There are a lot of really great pictures of story maps, but they were shot and I wasn't there when they were created. But I was there when this one was created. This guy's name is Gary. Gary, when I met him, he was, a founder of he was trying to get a startup off the ground. He's a musician, and he had this idea for a product that would allow musicians to collaborate and promote their work and manage their bands and a bunch of stuff. He called it MIMI for short, which is short for Music Industry Marketing Interface. He described his big idea to a friend of mine who ran a small development company. The friend of mine's a pretty notable guy. He's written books on Ruby on Rails and things like that, and the guy's a super sharp guy. And my friend says, this sounds great, Gary. We're going to use this agile process. Write down all the stuff you want and put it in a backlog. And then prioritize that. We will start working on the stuff that you think is most important, the highest value stuff first. So Gary did that. They got to work, and they were working in really short cycles. At the end of week 1, Gary saw some stuff working. And Gary said, wow, this is great. I've been imagining this for so long. It's great to see something working. A couple more weeks go by. Gary sees more stuff working. And Gary's saying, wow, this is it's pretty great. But software takes a long time, doesn't it? And my friend says, oh yeah, but we're just laying down a lot of the foundational stuff. Once we get all that done, it's going to start going really fast. A couple more weeks go by. Gary sees more software working. And Gary's saying, wow, this is taking a lot longer than I thought. And he asks the question that no developer wants to answer. He asks, when are we going to be done? And my friend tries to explain story points and velocity and some other stupid stuff that real humans don't understand. And at the end of the conversation, my friend's telling Gary it's going to be a long time, a combination of somewhere between a long time and we don't know. And Gary said, can we do something else other than Agile, because this isn't working very well. And that's when my friend called me and said, can you go help out Gary, talk some sense into him. I showed up to talk with Gary. My first conversation with Gary wasn't to explain Agile, wasn't to explain good stories or explain the story template. My first conversation was to talk to Gary about his big product idea. I'm going to call that framing. It's this first best conversation. It's to back up and have Gary tell me the big story of his product. What is it? Who is it for? Why are you building it? What does success look like for you? The next conversation actually is just talking about the people, the characters in our big story. We'll talk about who the users are, and as he's talking, I'm writing things down. I'm externalizing his ideas. And we get those ideas written down, and as soon as they're on cards, we can move them around and organize them. If an idea is more important than another one, you don't have to give people special instructions for them to realize if I put it on top, that means it's more important. They figure that out on their own. And we rip up things. Our next conversation, I say, okay, great, I've got the big idea, we know who the players are. Pretend for a minute your software is completely done and you ship it and it's going live tomorrow. Let's talk about a day in the life of these people using your product. Let's start from the beginning. Everybody knows the first steps are usually they sign up and log in, but then after that it gets a little bit more hazy. But he talks and he says, okay, well first they would do this, and then this, and then this. And as he's talking, I'm writing, and I'm writing down these short verb phrases, these steps, and we kind of get a flow left to right. And this is the first time Gary's actually told the story of his product. He's described features a lot. He said it looks like this. A lot. He's described his baby, you can think of that baby cake a lot, but he hasn't talked it through quite right. We find places where he hasn't thought it all the way through, where we have to say, oh gosh, I don't know what would happen there, and we talk about it, and we make some guesses about what steps would look like. When he gets to a place where he has given a lot of thought, lots of details spill out, and so the depth of this thing kind of holds, well, smaller steps, details, other things like that. What this is all a story map is. It starts with a big story, and story mapping is a way I get from a big story to lots of small stories. Simple structure, left to right flow with steps, top to bottom, breaking those things down. At the end of this conversation with Gary, it was about a 4-hour conversation. We're not done. We haven't talked through all the users. Where there's thin parts in the map, sometimes on a mature map, one we've been working on for a while, when it's thin, it means that's a super simple step. In this conversation, thin means I haven't thought about it much at all. And there were parts where he'd given a lot of thought, so it was super uneven how much thinking he had given this stuff. And Gary said, wow, this is great. I'm really, I've had this idea and this vision for a while, but I haven't had any way to think about it thoroughly, and this has really helped. And I know where to start thinking and filling in here. But we have a lot more to go. Jeff, how long do you think all this stuff is going to take to build? And I said, well, at the rate your team is going right now, this is about 6 to 9 months worth of work. And when we talk about the rest, it could easily be double that. And Gary turned white and said, I don't have that much money to build this. And I said, this is terrible. And how much, you've been building for a couple months, how much have you built so far? And Gary said, I haven't built any of this so far. In fact, the stuff I built was the stuff I kind of thought I had to build first. And now that I see this, I wouldn't have built any of what I built before. So this was a bad story for Gary. Now, if I fast forward, the happy ending is he did launch a product. The product is out there. Gary scaled up to between 50, 60 employees. He runs the company with his brother. His brother moved to Hawaii to run the part of the company. He moved to Israel, and they have a couple offices. And at the tail end of 2014, they were bought by a company called GoDaddy. Do people know who they are? So Mad Mimi is a product that's out there that does the direct email marketing stuff. It kind of has a cool look and feel because it's built by a musician. The company sends out millions of email messages a month, which everybody hates. But he's done pretty well with it. Now for him, getting his vision straight was the first step, and the map helped. The backlog did not. I'm going to show just a couple more examples of backlogs and some interesting backlog tricks, and we'll go from there. Look, this is a backlog being built by a company called Globo.com. Globo is a large media company, and they're the largest media company in Brazil. They own television stations, radio stations. They make a lot of made-for-TV movies and things like that. They are building a backlog, or they're thinking through a product called Baixa Tudo. It's Portuguese for download it all. They're building another release for an existing product that they need to substantially improve. Building the product starts by building that long line of green cards. It's just telling the story. And they're kind of good at controlling their flow. They don't get stuck in rat holes and go down deep at first. They get that long line of green cards, and then it's really long, so they add another card on top to sort of roll it up a little bit, to distill it. Makes it a little bit easier to read. You don't start top down, you kind of start middle out. That's what I've learned from doing this stuff. And then as they're watching they're looking at their existing product, they're seeing what it does, and they're saying, okay, it would be better if it did this, and as they get that main line out, and then they start saying, well, what about, and it would be better if, and they keep adding more body to this thing. Now there's some bright green cards in the middle, and everybody always asks me, well, what are those bright green cards in the middle? And there's no difference, they just ran out of the other cards. But if you watch, as they're pouring in details, there's a lot more of those bright green cards now than there was a minute ago, or this is kind of time lapse. It's because the longer they tell the story, they rip up cards, they replace cards, and the story keeps getting bigger. After a while, it starts to stabilize. And one of the things I've also learned the hard way is you need to move pretty quickly to start to visualize it. Now, usually I'll see people kind of build simple sketches of what a UI might look like, exactly the way those people at Atlassian were doing. They are people that tend to start with a sketchy thing and arrange it in a flow, and then they start writing bullet points underneath it to get something that's kind of mappy-like. These guys started with a map, partly because I've worked with them before, and then they moved from there to visualizing the UI. It's a developer and a UI person working together to extract stuff from the database so that they can be building this simple paper prototype using real digital assets. I didn't know they made the video. I found that picture of myself there. By the time I got there, the week after they made the video, the map is getting bigger and bigger. There are already lots of these. They've run out of white cards, and now they've got yellow cards in there. And they are hitting what every single person hits. They're hitting the too much to build problem. See there. Those are the punch points. got a couple more things I want to go through. Is your energy holding up okay?
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's lots of examples, but let me hit, well, a couple more. This is another backlog at Globo. It is a big project. When I showed up to work with them on this visit, they said that Monday morning they said, "Got to go work with this team. They're kind of in a crisis. They got a lot to build. They don't have much time." I showed up, and it wasn't one team. It was 4 teams in a room. They're working on a major kind of overhaul of their underlying content management system. The ownership, the leadership of Globo is, they're feeling like a third world country because their websites do not look as good as, their news website does not look as good as CNN.com, and their sports website doesn't look as good as ESPN, and their entertainment websites don't look as good as, American entertainment sites. They've got to change the content management system. They've got a charter to do that. They've got multiple teams that work together on it. When I showed up, they all had their separate backlogs, but they didn't know how to kind of sync them up or get them going. I said, look, it's one product. You've got to map it as one product. So get your backlogs on the wall. They knew how to do this. By the end of the day, they were there. In the process of building a map, when you map, you're kind of forced to think it through from a user's perspective. You find holes, and they found holes. They found overlap, places where one team was building something and the other team was building the same thing, and they debugged that. And they found places where they definitely needed to work together on things. Things were terrific. On Wednesday afternoon, somebody told me, "You really need to work with that team. They're in crisis." I said, no, I already worked with them on Monday. They're okay. They said, no, they're in crisis. Go check. I showed up. They were in crisis again. I said, gosh, you guys everything seemed so good on Monday. What went wrong? And they said, well, we started to look at the details and the dependencies, and we started doing estimation, and this is going to take a really long time. And I said, how long is this going to take? They said 12 to 14 months. Does anybody here know anybody from Brazil? You ever met a Brazilian before? Look, I've been to Brazil. A 9 o'clock meeting in Brazil usually starts around 10. Lunch in Brazil usually lasts 2.5 hours. When a Brazilian developer tells you 12 to 14 months, that usually means somewhere between 2 years and never. And it's not going to get done. And I said, I thought you guys had an urgent deadline. And I said, yeah, we're supposed to go live for Brazilian elections in 4 months. How are we going to get all this done? I said, well, you're not. For one, that's not going to happen. But look, let's talk about what a successful outcome looks like for Brazilian elections. First off, you're going to have to focus on specific users and people. It's Brazilian elections, so look, what parts of, what do you want to, if you're looking at elections, they're not going to soap opera websites to see election results. It sounds like you need to focus on the news website, and said, oh yeah, we need to focus on the news website, maybe some other political sites, and you're trying to renovate or get more interactive content. And they said, yeah, we have this problem where when people show up to look at the news website, it has yesterday's stories on it, and it's hard for the people who edit content to get the content edited online in real time, so there's those problems. Plus we need interactive graphs and things like that. And we have a long talk about what would be a fabulous release for Brazilian elections. But we'll narrow the focus to focusing on those news websites and the type of things that users want to see there. They say, okay, we got this. We grab these rolls of blue painter's tape. What color is painter's tape here?
Kreppband.
Say it again.
Kreppband.
Color.
Kreppband.
Yeah, what color is?
Yellow. It's yellow.
Yellow. Okay,
It's not
great.
blue,
That's it.
post-it color.
Yeah. Yeah. That's this color. That's the stuff I have in my bag. So
Yeah.
I had that with me. All right, throw lines across there, and they start moving things up and down. They start shifting things around. The map that we end up with is, he's in the middle of doing this. This map is sliced up. So look, let's see if I can annotate this. That thing there is a minimum viable product. It is a first release. But what makes it minimum viable isn't because it is the least we could possibly build. What makes it minimum and viable means successful, It means the least we could build to be successful in our current market. And as long as we narrowed our focus to the news website and news people and stuff we need during elections, it's agreeing on that target market outcome, agreeing on what success looks like, that allows us to find minimum viable. When people argue about it, it's usually because they haven't agreed on that little thing that there's a few words written on there that summarizes a long conversation they had. And once they get the hang of this, they realize, oh, we're not supposed to prioritize these stories. What we're supposed to do is prioritize these outcomes. We have to think about what users and customers, and hey, the next big thing on the horizon is reality TV shows and the recruiting process for that. And if we support people doing that, that's going to change things. And they start thinking of a roadmap in terms of not what features when, but who when, what markets when, or what groups of people when. That's what drives priority. These mapping structures, they are oversimplified. You can't see branches, you can't see overlapping workflows. But they are, the simple two-dimensional structure allows you to prioritize pretty quickly and make sense of things, look at things holistically. Now, look, I just told you, yeah, let's do this. I'll refer to this as a release strategy, but the strategy, this is our guess, this is a hypothesis, this is what we believe is true. And how do we know that those choices they made are right? How do you know that they're going to work? And well, in fact, you don't. I'm going to show, this is a quick visualization from a guy named Henrik Niebuhr. Henrik is a guy that's done these Spotify development culture videos, and they're pretty cool. Look, if you have an idea for a product, I believe if I build this, everyone will think it is awesome, and I will make lots of money. But if I were to start to build this in a piece at a time, and I were to try and show it to people to see if they really like it, if I build a first piece, and people look at it, they say, well, I don't know, that doesn't look like a transportation device. To me, I can't imagine how I would go anywhere in that, and my feedback is that sucks. And if we add more to it, it still sucks. And it still sucks, and it doesn't not suck as a solution until I can start to use it as a transportation device. So look, Henrik's basic idea is this. Let's start by delivering something to someone that does sort of suck, but at least it's a transportation device. Now, that's a crap transportation device, and I'm pretty sure that it's not going to be viable. Viable means successful. But I don't mean it's a crappy skateboard. I mean it's a fantastic skateboard, but a skateboard is clearly not what's needed if I'm trying to commute to work. But at least I can get some feedback on it, and people say, well, it's not fast enough to commute to work, and I fall down a lot. And we can say, well, in release 2, we fixed the falling down problem with this handle thing, it's a scooter thing. And I say, well, it's still not fast, and I avoid a little more injury. In release 3, we've got some pedals on this thing, and this is better, and now this is starting to get good. That's great. If you live in the Netherlands, you can stop right there. That's all you need. If you've got a little bit farther to commute, things like that, adding that engine to that makes that a lot funner. And look, adding a body and an extra and 2 more wheels and things like that, yeah, that still makes it fun. But the truth is that minimum and viable might have been somewhere in there, and it really depends on who your customers are and who your market is. Maybe I could have stopped there, but if I just shoot right for if my hypothesis is big and I just build that one big one, we never learn. Let's make this real here. This guy's name is Eric. Eric is, this is Eric's backlog on the left-hand side here. Now, he's got this sliced up into releases. Now, the reason the top of it is empty is he's been pulling sticky notes off and moving them onto this task board to the right, and his team has been breaking them down and building them. So he's working his way through this release. Now, it would have looked like that when it was full, something like that. But the thing is, Eric has already released this product, and he's building this for a next release, and a next release, and a next release, and below that are a bunch of other ideas for this thing. Now, what I'm telling you is he's releasing this product knowing full well that the people who get the product will probably not like it. He knows full well that this product will not be successful in the market, that it's not viable. Let me ask you a quick question. If you were going to release a product to someone who you know won't think it's successful or won't like it, who would you release it to? Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. To friends, because yeah, they'll understand you. But has anybody ever seen kind of a drawing that looks like this before? This is called the crossing the chasm curve, and it looks like when we look at the adoption of a product, we'll look at the number of users over time. And the big majority is over here, and we've got the early and the late majority. These people over here are the laggards. And for people who haven't seen this thing before, I'm sure you have heard the term early adopters. It's the early adopters are here, and these people are called the innovators. Innovators are the people that will use a product even before it's a product. They'll assemble their own. I know people that have bought a kit to build a 3D printer online, and then say, are you one? That's called an innovator. Innovators don't need a product. They will solder it together themselves to get a product. But early adopters might need it to be a product. But if you ask a customer if they'll try something, they'll say, well, I don't know who else is using this. They are not an early adopter. Early adopters don't really care who else is using it so much. If they think it's a cool solution or if it's interesting, they'll adopt it. That's why a lot of products fall into this gap, because early adopters will pick it up, but they never quite get the product over the hump. Now, if we're trying to build a product that's going to all these people, well, it's this core group of people that we want to get it to. And the term used by the product people I work with, the term we're kind of socializing here, is a CDP, which is short for Customer Development Partners. These are people that you know, that are your friends, but they're also your customers. They're the customers you've made friends with. And these are the people that kind of fit this profile. They'll give you feedback early. And Eric, this guy that's there, he's releasing lots of small releases into a small pool of people. He'll iterate with them until he is confident that they love the product, confident until they think it's awesome, confident until they're confident it's awesome, and he is. There's an old expression that there's never a second chance for a first impression. So look, if you show a product that is not ready to this majority, they're not going to try it again, or it's going to be expensive for you to get them to try it again. And the term we use for this strategy is nail it before you scale it. All right, one more story mapping trick, and then we'll shut this down. I wanted to finish in an hour. This has already been an hour and 15 minutes. Let's do this. Look, suppose finishing on time was sort of important to you. If you need to finish on time, look, one of the things I'll focus on is leveraging iterative and incremental thinking. Now, I think some people may have seen this. This is an old visualization that I socialized a long time ago. But the idea is that most agile people fall into this trap of thinking only incrementally. Look, imagine you are Leonardo da Vinci, and you have this, you need to paint a painting for a client. You've only got 5 days to do it. An agile person rushes up to you and says, look, Leonardo, all you got to do is build a backlog. You will break your painting up into painting parts, and every day you will paint a painting part, and you will see your painting come alive. And look, on day 1 you will paint part, and on day 2 you will paint more parts, and on day 3 more parts, and day 4, and on day 5 your painting will be done, and you'll be able to see progress every step of the way, and you could ship any day if you kind of had to. And this strategy works so long as you've got clear vision and you have accurate estimates. Now, does anybody believe that Leonardo da Vinci paints that way? Look, the way artists actually work is they start by acknowledging that we may not be exactly clear on how this is going to end up. And if I'm not exactly clear on how this is going to end up, I'm going to start with a bit of a sketch or an underpainting, something that lets me see what the composition looks like. And I might decide that, oh my gosh, I think the smile is going to be an important part of this picture, and those mountains in the background are distracting, so I will iterate, I will change it. What this means, well, all right, if this was software, in the software world, this is called bad requirements or scope creep. In the real world, this is just called learning. And that's okay. And what it means is if you're managing a backlog of stories, it means you write stories that make changes to what you did before. But if you're watching the clock, you focus, you say, okay, we've got to jump up on a fidelity level here, and we've got to start adding color and form and more stuff to it, and we keep making changes as we go. I know that matures pretty quickly, but Da Vinci works fast. This is iterative and incremental. When we say iterative, when we're talking about a process, it means repeat the same process over and over. But when we say iterative and it's a product, we mean the same thing as rework. It's well, and that's a problem. It's one thing that people don't get used to. That's why people will go for that incremental strategy. Now let me put this in a map. Now I've been showing lots of super big maps, but they're really usually not that big. This is a map for one feature. These two guys have been working on it. So one mistake that people follow is they feel like they got to map the whole product. Don't. If you're adding one feature, map the one feature you're adding to your product. That feature starts with one user that does 1, 2, 3 steps, and another user that does one more step that's kind of an approval step, or I acknowledge that step. And they've already done some UI prototype stuff and tested that stuff. You can see they printed out and put it behind. I know that is a story about that pop-up because I can see it right behind there. And they've broken this thing up into slices. But those slices aren't releases. Those slices are their development strategy, what they want to build first and next and next. Is that first slice that's going to give us a sketch, or what sometimes gets called a walking skeleton or a steel thread. It's just enough to see it work end to end. As a matter of fact, to see it work end to end, there's a first step the user is supposed to do here, and they decided to skip it or fake it or write some code to stub it in, and then they'll actually do the step in the second slice. So that, well, with every pad of sticky notes, you get these two shapes. You get that square and you get that diamond, and when they twist it into a diamond, it means this is a story about something technical we're going to do, and yeah, what it really means is we're going to build it and rip it out later. And then they're slowly building this thing up. It's doing things this way that maximizes how much they can learn. That very first slice is working end to end. They can see it running. They can start to make sure all the database tables are built. They can start to look at performance and scalability early. This kind of strategy has you building things more like an artist. And what it means, and the reason this kind of strategy is a little bumpy, is look, if you were trying to demonstrate what you were doing and you're at a sprint review and you show the first version to stakeholders look at it and say, well, I don't like that very much at all. And they might think you don't know much about how to write software, how to do sculpture, but in fact that's exactly how you do sculpture, and it's exactly how you write software if you want to finish on time. Most people will opt for building a perfectly formed nose instead of building the whole form. All right, let's see if I can put all this together. Yeah, that's it. Look, I wanted to make the point that stories are about a way you need to change the way you work, not the way you write down information. That we're using simple visualizations to anchor our stories, to work like vacation photos. They help us build shared understanding. Look, we need to map the whole story to find the parts that matter most. We take big stories and map them all. Look, if we think things through, we can pull out things that don't help, that don't minimize that out, that don't maximize outcome, and then we can remove the things that are not giving us the outcome and impact that we want. Well, what that guy Eric was doing was building minimum viable product tests. He needs to do that to find out what's minimum viable on the market. And what those last guys were doing were building their product up iteratively and incrementally. The mapping thing is just another way to deal with stories, and for me, the mapping thing keeps the original promise of stories, the ability to really have a conversation about what people are doing with your product. That was 1 hour and 17 minutes, as we started at 6:15. More than you needed. I can answer any questions you got, but thanks for showing up. If you got to get out of here, it's kind of hot and muddy. I don't know what you showed up to hear and listen to, but does anybody have any questions? Quiet.
We know everything.
Yeah, I suspect that could be true. I know, from the show of hands for people that have read the old XP books, that there are some people that have been at this a little while. So I'll ask you a question. For the people that have been at this a while, does it change? How is that different than you thought of for stories? Does it change the way you think about? Is that different than you thought stories were? Not an easy question to answer. All right.
I have been quite some time at this, and I feel that actually the story writing and the process matures, and partly not in a good way, because everyone wants to do some sort of agile, and what they typically still do, although there are a lot of consultants, they still just put their requirements in some sort of story. So this has not changed a lot since I started with Agile in 2005-06. And I think this is still a problem for organizations, especially in Europe, I believe.
Yeah, I think again, the original promise of it was changing the way we work, and people are using the template and acceptance criteria to displace other kinds of the story template plus acceptance criteria, maybe plus a few other templates, end up replacing other styles of requirements people used to write, and then people complain about them being, bad requirements again. And the only thing that makes them good is the conversation. But that's the big point I think people have missed. But the bigger question is, what do you do about that? I don't think people actually like to talk to each other. So.
They oftentimes do not. It's the same as the guy at Google had a hard time to introduce TDD because they said, we can do it already, we're very good at programming, we don't need to do tests. And this is what legacy product people think.
Just out of curiosity, the guy you're talking about, who are you talking about?
I forget his name all the time. Who did that testing on the toilet?
Oh, yes.
Anyone knows the name?
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I've talked to a couple of people there, but yeah, I remember that thing, and I forgot that was.
And he had a really hard time to introduce that because people, the picture you have yourself and the picture others have of the quality of your work is obviously oftentimes different.
Well, is there anything, forget the stories and the story mapping, I can answer questions on anything. Please. So, yeah.
I'm Ralph from Stefan, and you said something I really love, which is the heart of business decisions is not what to build, but who to pay attention to. That was excellent. I love it.
I don't have an original thought in my head, but let me tell. Well, there is.
So my question on that is, totally agree, but oftentimes you have business owners who should take business decisions considering this, and it's very hard to tell them. So how do you convince them?
I tell them to read this Harvard Business Review article called "The Big Lie of Strategic Planning." Because it's a Harvard Business Review article. Oops. Thank you. Because it's a Harvard Business Review article, they'll pay attention to it. And it's fairly recent. It's a 2014 article, but it boils down, or it distills strategy. If you've ever read an HBR article, they've got the simple bullet, but it boils down strategy into two kind of silly questions. It's where you'll play and how you'll win. Now, when they say where you play, this is shorthand for your target market, and market are the customers and users. And the how you'll win is, well, how is this solution better than alternatives? Well, basically, how does it help? And if you're competing commercially, how is it better? How is it better than competitors? How is it better than what they do today? The paper does a pretty good job of making the point that I don't have any good ways of convincing them. Just tell them, look, if your strategy is to focus on everybody, you know the product is going to be a lot bigger, right? And if your decision strategy is not to decide, that's not a good strategy. And the paper is pretty good at pointing out that the planning by putting features into a roadmap doesn't work. Planning by budgeting for features, those kinds of things don't work. It's focusing on markets and focusing on market outcomes that does work. And if you've got they also, let me give you one other thing. One of the things they talk about is when you say strategy, it means the same thing, that strategy is always a risk. It is always a guess. And they say guess, they say gamble, and I'm kind of building up to this. They start saying bet. Now, bet as a word I'm starting to hear more and more. I was talking to a guy I know at Spotify, and I met him when Spotify was much smaller, based in Stockholm, and now he lives in Boston because Spotify just bought a company in Boston, and he's helping that get going. And over in this conversation, just a month ago, he kept saying the bets we're working on right now are, and he kept using that word bet over and over. It helped people understand that, yeah, we can build these things, but there's no guarantee they're going to work, or we're going to get what we expect. But I think I've gone sideways from your question a little bit. But
I'm fine.
Yeah, but these are the things that when people can't prioritize or can't focus, usually you have to go up a couple levels in the stack to the decisions about who our customers are and what our product vision is. And those are the things that we really struggle with. Any other questions? Yeah. There, and then there.
I often face the situation that stories are too big to do it at one time. Do you have an approach on how to solve such situations?
I may end up redrawing one I just drew at the tail end of the class here. One of the points I'll make is these are stories all the way through. We start with big ideas and then we break them down into smaller ideas. And our job at this point isn't to say, okay, all that big idea broke into all those smaller ideas. Our job is to cut away, and we might call all these a first release, and we might cut some more things and call those a second release, and we might call those things trash. That's what we do, and we may load those first things into a product backlog, but look, those are still too big, and that's okay. They're supposed to be. What we end up doing, what I talk about is this original mantra, and for people who have been around for a while, you've heard this card conversation confirmation mantra. What this means, people heard this before? That, what I'm going to tell you is that you need to use what I call a story workshop, because I started with this before Scrum, but what gets called a backlog grooming or backlog refinement session. If I bring a card into a room and I've got people, ideally people in front of a whiteboard, they're going to talk about it. Talking about it, well, I bring that card in. Talking about really means build shared understanding. Like I mentioned earlier in this conversation, it really means doing what those guys at Atlassian did. Show me what it looks like. Sketch what it looks like. Write down some things. Let me ask questions. I want to make sure that I understand. Draw some boxes and arrows and flow charts, whatever works to help us understand it. And then this last confirmation thing is where we ask the question, what would we check to confirm this is done? Getting to the too big part of the thing. What would we check to confirm it's done? This question gets answered easiest when people get it or understand it, and this is where we start making this bulleted list of, well, I bring it up and I do this and I enter this, I expect to see that. This is where people may be familiar with, you could use behavior-driven development and be given when then kinds of form, but however you choose to write it, I end up just looking for quick bullet points. All right, let me ask a question here. Who has been in a backlog grooming or backlog refinement session before? Okay, that's a lot. Now, if you think back to the last time you were in one of those, and if you think of stories you brought in to talk about, when you left the backlog grooming session, were stories smaller than you thought when they came in? Were they about the same size as you thought when they came in? Or were they larger than you thought when you came in? How many had stories that were larger? How many had stories that were about the same size? How many had stories that were smaller? Smaller? So I usually say this, they're never smaller. They're almost always larger.
So one thing that we successfully did, like you said, building the hypothesis and then using it for the sub-stories. So actually asking each sub-story for its own contribution on the main hypothesis. That often helps to kill whole stories.
Oh yeah, so that's one way to kill them. Yeah. So I'm looking at size kind of here at the tail end. I find that exactly. If you start here, and when you're talking about finding what's our big hypothesis and killing off things that aren't needed, for me, I'll use slicing that way or good conversations that way. But even when I load those things in the backlog, I've really committed. I'm going to be building those things. When I come into this conversation, at least where I'm going on the stories too big thing is, it's when we identify all these acceptance criteria, I find that I can kind of rope up 3 or 4 acceptance criteria and say, okay, I can tackle those 3 in one story. We can take these other 2, separate those off into another story. Those 2, put it in another story, and those 2, and put it in another story. My point is that the stories, they continuously break down. They may start big, but it's these good story conversations that help us make them small. When you're trying to make them small before you have the conversation, that's a bit of skill. It takes time. So I think my short answer is, who I want in this conversation is a product owner or a UX, someone who understands the product. I want somebody who's a developer and understands the developer, and I want somebody who's a tester. And I want to make clear, it is your people's job to understand this story, to get the acceptance criteria, and it is your job to break it down. And oftentimes, it's the acceptance criteria or having that will help us break it down. Also, get the developers and others that will come up with, they know how to sometimes better break things down. So I'll hold them responsible for breaking it down. That may be controversial to some folks. I run into a lot of people that say it's the product owner's job to break them down first. But of course, I want developers and others involved upstream here too. So there's a lot of people there. But let them stay big as long as you can, actually. But you don't want them big when you get them down. When you get them down here, it's the backlog grooming where I pull them out of the backlog and load them in here, have those conversations. And that's where they come out a lot smaller from that thing. It's these that end up going back in there. Does that answer the question? Over answer it? Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Do you still have another question?
Yeah. A lot of things that you mention are similar to the thinking in the startup methodology.
Yeah.
Is that accidentally or is that on purpose?
Am I thinking, it's on purpose. So I do an awful lot of focus on what's going on in this product discovery area, and we talk an awful lot about, that's one thing maybe I could have or should have talked about tonight, but you kind of have to know the Agile stuff to, one of the things we'll talk a lot about, if you were to look, there's a wall there that has all these hand drawings like this from a class that we just went through, and on the tail right-hand edge there, I'll talk, there's a couple different quick and dirty models that describe how we don't. I'll use Scrum mostly for delivery work, and when you start using lean startup thinking and validated learning, it can happen a lot faster than a sprint. You can come up with ideas and validate them in hours or days, not weeks. So it runs at a different cycle. So you'll see some references there for parallel track or dual track development. You'll see a model that flows from hypothesis through to test through to building. So, no, not accidental.
And one note for not everything is a requirement. In normal business thinking, you're absolutely right. But there are circumstances, for example, when there are laws
Yes.
that you really have to implement, and our company is doing that, and it's really hard to strip things down when you have to implement laws. Legal compliance.
Yeah.
But still, if you are a law and you have to implement it, it's really, really often not so easy to decide what not to do, because it's, you can't really decide not to implement.
You're absolutely
something.
right. Yeah. There's an old, by the way, I meant to add onto this, it's a story template or opportunity canvas here. Story maps kind of fit here. This is their sweet spot. And then over here, when stories are small, this is where those story conversations or workshops come in. I'm telling you that because I can't let go of the drawing until it's right. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Remember, gosh, I don't think I can reduplicate it. There is an old book out there called How Designers Think, and he kind of drew a pyramid of sort of a hierarchy of requirements or constraints. And on the bottom were regulatory, because basically this is how malleable they are. Can I change them? Things like that. Regulatory, the least malleable. And then above that were user things. Unless you change who your users are, you can't make them smarter. You can't give them more domain knowledge and things like that. You can't change them. And then, oh gosh, I forget the other things, but there were choices we made about the tools we used, what platform or things like that that we used, and then above that was our individual kind of design choices or how it looked and things like that, the look and the detail design. This is the easiest to change, and look, if you're an architect, you may not think changing the underlying platform is easy, but try and change, evaluate changing the platform versus educating or changing your users or making them like a product they don't, and then regulatory is at the bottom. You're right. Those are the hard ones to change. But I've been in enough, worked with enough, one big, I don't know much about Dodd-Frank laws. Does anybody have to work in finance where they had to, it's a bunch of laws that were put in place around financial reporting in the U.S. I've been working with finance organizations there. Everybody had on their books to be compliant with Dodd-Frank, and I saw lots of different ways to interpret those regulatory requirements. Some ways were kind of expensive, and other ways were super expensive. And I saw people's different interpretations of how this regulatory requirement needed to be put in our software very different. So even, yes, the regulatory requirement is not changed, but how people interpret it, some people can turn something simple into something super complicated. So, any other? I don't answer short questions, I'm sorry, but in the back first and then forward. Yeah.
Hello. I really like this concept of showing stuff, so getting together in the room, making this meeting and describing the stuff. But actually with my team we cannot afford this luxury because we're spread around in several countries. So the only thing we have is calls. And very often I explain some stuff, I get totally misunderstood on the other side. I take screenshots and even then it's not always enough. And I'm wondering how can I make it better?
If we're, if you're trying to get that shared understanding quality, if you're co-located in the same space, it's pretty easy. You've got whiteboards and you've got sticky notes. If you're not co-located, if you're distributed, you need to be able to show and tell stories. Look for tools that allow multiple people to give input. What I mean by that is not showing slides or other things, using things like variations of Google Docs, and including there are things that allow people to draw in Google Docs. There's a tool called Murally that allows people to put things on walls and things like that. There's a tool that I use for sticky notes called Cardboard. It's at cardboardit.com. Somebody told me recently about something called Stormboard that they said they rely on. And I'm finding more and more tools that allow people to move things around, things like that. And one of the things, one thing we'll do, I've seen people do other kind of facilitation tricks where you explain it and then you ask everybody else to write down for you what they heard and send it back to you, and you'll integrate it back. Or one of the other things is that I'll do is if I'm writing, I will not write the acceptance criteria, or I won't let product people write the acceptance criteria. They need to listen and they need to write them. And what they write is sometimes a shock. And let them know, look, we run a risk of you guys not understanding each other. I'm not trying to cause more work for you. If you understand this, then this should be super fast. You write it down. That helps a little bit. And the only other thing are things like this camera that I'm using right here. This is a document camera, and I see there's a company called, mine is made by a company called Elmo, not like the Sesame Street character, but there is a company called IPEVO that IPEVO, and I see those on Amazon, and you can buy them. And I see people putting these things in conference rooms because I can point these down at a tabletop, or I can point them out there at you guys, and point them at a whiteboard and move them around and things. And I see people putting these in conference rooms when they're doing conference calls. And yeah, I see a lot of HipChat and Slack and other things like that, and a lot of photographs of what happened on the whiteboard. But it's hard no matter what you do. Does any of that, I think you've tried a lot of stuff, the way you're explaining things.
Yeah, well, we mainly use Jira.
But the thing
is, Jira is basically documents.
Yep.
So if you don't put visuals, it's still documents.
Exactly. And so I got to tell you that people at Atlassian don't use Jira, not for that. They use their walls for that. And people at Atlassian, when talking with them, they say, look, one of the bad behavioral things they want back to the you can't change users thing. The way the tool is supposed to work is you're supposed to put all the documents in Confluence, where you can put photographs and videos and more richer things, and then you link your Jira tickets back to Confluence. That's the way they want you to be using it. And they're trying to, well, it's one of the behavior changes they're trying to get their users to do. They don't think people use their product right. Because they put it all in Confluence. They don't put very much in Jira. And you can see I can show you a lot more pictures from their environment. They don't use Jira or Confluence to have story discussions. You know, you don't have a choice. And actually, they're running into, one of the guys I was showing you pictures of Confluence, he's one of 5 product managers. He was one of 5 product managers for Confluence when I met him. They now have 7, and they have a big development office in Vietnam they've just put up, and they're running into a lot of, they used to be all co-located in Australia and Sydney, and now they've got Sydney and San Francisco and I don't know what city in Vietnam, and everybody struggles with it. And anyway, but they, at Atlassian, they put the product managers in Vietnam. They won't separate the people that decide from the people who build. They don't want to deal with the problem.
Okay, thank you very much.
Not helpful. I know it's not. Hey, yeah, there was another question in there. I got to answer quicker if you still have it.
I had a question. How does this whole thing scale with multiple teams in multiple locations? We had this already, but how does it scale in general with multiple teams?
How does which part scale?
The user story, the mapping, the overview about these things, the spreading of the things into the distribution of the things to the teams. So if you have multiple teams working on the product.
I don't know. There's a lot of aspects to that. Yeah, first off, full stop. You know, you can. Everything is easy when you're co-located. It's a small team.
Yes.
Okay, you distribute it. It's going to be harder no matter what you do, and it'll be always less perfect. If you distribute it and you scale it to big, it's going to be even worse. There's nothing you can do. So the best you can hope for is it sort of not sucking too bad, kind of thing. I don't know if I can answer any good questions about scaling. I see people using maps for tools, but what I see people using, I pointed out here that maps are one of the things we use kind of in discovery to make bigger kind of strategic decisions about cutting up that backlog. And then oftentimes we'll build the map as a visualization and people will go back and reference it so they can see where the story is in the map, but they're usually having these smaller conversations with it. If I can do a quick show and tell, I just want to show you something that's one of the things I love about the story maps is, at least if you're face-to-face, they scale super well. Let's drag that on the screen. This is the beginning of it's the beginning of a 5-day workshop, or kind of 4.5-day workshop at a company called Pearson Education. If people have heard of them, they're parent companies for publishers like Addison Wesley and Prentice Hall and things like that. This is a super boring beginning of a workshop where they have flown the leadership of, I don't know, 4 or 5 teams. I lose track, and we're doing kind of a big kind of a exercise to work together and talk about risks early on. And then this is the beginning of day 1, and then everybody went home, and there is a small core product team that is working together to pull they're trying to get the product backlog out of the tool it's in and onto the wall. Now, they go through this, we're basically calling them out, and people are writing them up on sticky notes so that we can represent the backlog on that wall as a map all the way around. And I killed the sound because it's boring, but I wanted to, I was lucky I kind of got a video of us doing this. They're getting this thing put up. I was kind of helping facilitate. But this is in the evening. There's a small group of people. They've already worked together to build the backlog, but they need to start doing some planning and estimation. We got done late at night, and before we left, we pulled all those sticky notes off the wall, except for what's called the backbone, the top of the map. And I missed the pictures. We have these big piles of sticky notes. We came in, the whole team came back in, and we had them put it all back on the wall. Now I can quiz you and say, well, why would we take it all off, put it on the wall, take all the time to write it all down, put it all on the wall, take it off the wall, put it in a pile, and then have them put it all back on? You can probably guess. We could have emailed the backlog out to all the developers and said, please read the backlog. Well, like, that's going to work. But having them do this and ask each other questions, find things, it helps them build some deep understanding. They're different teams working on different parts, and they know their part, but they don't know each other's parts. They don't know the shape of the whole flow. And it's a pretty big thing. It's going to take over a year to build. They go to work and get this on the wall. Then, as they're doing this, they have lots of questions for each other. They start tagging the questions and risks and concerns, and they're going to use all the tagging stuff that they're doing to drive conversations over the next couple days. They're going to break into small groups over the next few days, do story workshoppy type things, understand these better so that they can get better estimates and start to gather more data on all those things. And so they tag them, and then, even before going into the details, the product manager described his release strategy. He says, look, in the first release, we need to be able to achieve these kind of outcomes. It needs to be, we need to ship it, needs to be able to do this and this. In the second release, we need to expand to this kind of market. And people go to work and people move these things up and down in slices themselves. Product owner does not prioritize here. The team prioritizes. Product owner communicates strategy, and they all move things up and down. When it's big and on a wall like that, and they understand it, that works super well. It gives them really a lot of buy-in. At the end, we get that. They go through lots and lots of conversation. I'm going to show just a couple more pictures, and you guys should be able to get out of here, I think, soon. Look, we are doing estimation. I think some of you guys have done t-shirt sizing, large, medium, small, extra large. And they're doing t-shirt sizing directly in the map. And the big things at the top of the map I'll call activities. And activities are, if we organize things in the activity, basically everything in there is kind of the same general functional area, and that works. Well, there's an inside joke this team had. Somebody, sometime a long time ago at Pearson, got into somebody's slide deck and they put kitten photos in the deck. And now, ever since then, they've always used some kind of animal that people have snuck into the meeting. In this particular meeting, the animal is a lizard, because somebody snuck into the thing, a lizard. And so we're sizing these things, but these are lizard sizes. I was going to go forward here. There's the lizards, I'm sorry. That is small, that is a gecko. This is medium, that is an iguana. This is large, that is a Komodo dragon. And that's Godzilla, that is extra large. They equate these to a week or less, 2 weeks or less, 4 weeks or less, or God knows how long that's going to take. And when you look around at the estimates, these people are kind of moving things around. This is how they size this. And again, the map kind of keeps things in a nice order. And when you spread it out big on a wall, you get all that shared understanding stuff. And this backlog has hundreds of items in it. This is doing relative sizing, so they're not story pointing the whole thing. But the map kind of served as kind of a structure to hold it. It's probably not the scaling question you asked. But the truth is, this organization found that it was worth flying all these people together in one location for a 1-week workshop to plan, and even the scaled agile framework or SAFE will talk about a release planning thing, or a quarterly planning where we bring a lot of people together to do it. And they were doing things like that, basically. Any specific questions about scaling that I can?
So would you have multiple product owners basically working in the team, or would you have just one product owner who has the?
You need multiple product owners. Yeah. You divide up your product into product parts.
Areas of product.
Yeah, areas of product. But you look for one head of product. At Confluence, for example, there are currently 7 product managers that run Confluence. One of the product managers is senior, and he is one of the founders of Atlassian, still one of the people that runs it, or at least, and sometimes I see a head of product that isn't one of the 7, it's an 8th that is called a chief product owner, a head of product. But Atlassian, the founder still manages one part of the product, but he also manages the other 6 guys, and it keeps the product coherent. Those people have to be working with each other. They have to be working together as a one level up team. So, I'm sorry I'm not giving short answers. Any other questions? It's 8:10. Should we call it? We started at 6, that's a couple hours. I'm happy to answer any more questions. Should we do a countdown? Yeah.
Okay, so you asked for that.
Yeah, I'm happy to keep going. I just don't want to keep people here if they're, I saw a couple people had to leave, but
So as you call the middle phase, let's call it product discovery. And then I guess you can already guess what the question is. So many people with product discovery also already consider sorts of validation. Like, for example, you mentioned working with mockups or even high-level mockups.
yeah.
And how about including customers there, if you like, are going for a mass market?
Yeah, that's not validation if you don't.
Okay,
Yeah.
as easy as that, but you wouldn't do that with the, I guess you wouldn't do that with the user story map, but with
No.
like the paper prototype or something.
Yes, exactly. Well, a paper prototype and actually, we could go a lot, spend a lot of time on that
Right. Here comes the follow-up question. So how do you do time management? Because whenever you invalidate, then your whole schedule for filling the next sprint is at risk.
You gotta do it ahead of that. Maybe I'll draw the, well, there's a bunch of models to draw. You can't do discovery work just in time.
Okay, that's okay. That's the only thing I wanted to hear, because some people actually promote like the synchronized sprints, like a discovery phase, like 2 weeks before.
It's not a discovery phase, it's a design phase when they do that. It's my opinion. If you need to be able to predict, then it's not really discovery. If you really are validating.
I'm all with you.
Yeah, okay, I think we're of the same mind, but yeah, it's kind of like a drug company scheduling the exploration and discovery of the drug, and then on the Q4 we will then roll out the new drug you've discovered. It doesn't work that way. You don't construct a plan for that. Sometimes, yeah. Anybody else? All right, let's call it. Thanks very much for coming on.